Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, joining you at Gold Hill again this morning. I had the chance to meet some of you last week when I was visiting as well, and it's my pleasure and delight to be here to speak to the question, why bother with God today? You know, many assume that the Christian faith has nothing relevant to say in this day and age. Belief in God belongs to a bygone era. And some of the statistics confirm our suspicions. The most recent survey by the National Centre for Social Research says that 53% of people in the UK say they are not religious. This compares with 31% in 1983. And amongst 18 to 25-year-olds, the figure it's bigger, it's 71%. The majority of young people in the UK do not bother with God today. So why take time to consider something that many consider to be irrelevant and dying? I want to thank you for coming to hear what a Christian might say. You know, the subject of what we believe is so wide-ranging, and we could be coming at this question from a number of different perspectives. Perhaps you're thinking, I don't want to bother with God today because I'd rather not embrace insanity. Thank you very much. People that believe in God are at worst deluded or at best just a bit weak. Belief in God is for needy people who cannot cope with the real world. And perhaps slightly confusing verses about shepherds, sheep, and wolves have only confirmed your suspicions. Surely these words, even if they are the words of Jesus, have no bearing on reality in 21st century Britain. Well, you might be interested to know that this was my view growing up. I have not always believed in God. I started investigating Christianity in my late teens, and I had a very fixed image in my mind that Christianity was irrelevant and that Christians were slightly odd and needy. Christians were people who lacked social graces, a sense of humor, fashion sense, and emotional intelligence. And church was a club for such socially awkward people to hang out together. My husband, Conrad, who I didn't know at the time, had similar views. And he remembers as a young student his first contact with Christians. He was surprised how normal they were. He began to meet people he could relate to, people who were drawn to spiritual things, not because of something lacking in themselves, but because of something inherently attractive. His perception of Christians was being challenged, and it was the beginning of a journey for him. This idea that belief in God reflects human neediness stems from the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who you've probably come across. And his view was that humans have invented God to meet a need in themselves, often expressed as belief in God is a psychological crutch. Well, there is a lot that we could say to this. Freud's theory is interesting, and it might be reasonable if God does not exist. But if God does exist, you could make a case that atheism is a psychological crutch invented to avoid having to answer to a higher being. The German psychiatrist Manfred Lutz puts it like this: if God does not exist, then Freud can explain religion as delusion. But if God does exist, then Freud can explain atheism as delusion. As to whether God exists or not, Freud cannot help us. The question to be asking then is, does God exist? Because if he does, then he might be worth bothering with. And so does he exist, or does he not? Well, to look at this question, we need to start to ask some other questions. Where do the most persuasive answers lie to the questions that we are asking. We're asking all kinds of questions about meaning, purpose, identity, and there are all kinds of answers out there. But where do the most persuasive answers lie? You see, if something is true, it should have a capacity to explain the world that we live in, rather than throw us into further confusion. Perhaps the biggest question of all is, why suffering? Why the horrors of war? Why traffic accidents? Why illness? Why tsunamis? Suffering is the question that never goes away and affects all of us. And I will say more about this evening if you're interested. But one view is that if God does not exist, then who are you asking your question to? Who are you addressing your why question to? This is just the way the world is. Accidents happen. DNA makes mistakes. People just are the way they are. There's nothing especially right or wrong. But the problem with that view is, what do I do about the feeling of anger that I have when I see suffering in the world? Is this something that you're telling me I need to ignore or suppress? Is this the most persuasive answer to the question, why suffering? The Christian faith makes sense of the anger and outrage that you feel by telling you there is something wrong with the world. You are right to feel that way. This is not the way the world is supposed to be. There is something wrong. And in our passage today, Jesus is speaking about himself using pictures and images from farming that the people of his day would be able to relate to. And he uses lots of metaphors. He describes himself as a shepherd, which is a term also used for religious leaders at that time. And here the shepherd is taking care of sheep, referring to ordinary people like you and I. But this is not simply a happy scene. There is a wolf in this scene who wants to attack the flock and scatter it. You see, the Christian view says that evil is real. The atrocities of our world are not simply explained by cultural differences, evolutionary processes, and personal preferences. There is a wolf who seeks to bring harm, who is referred to in the verses just before those that we read as a thief and a robber who comes only to steal and kill and destroy. The Christian view says evil is real, there is something wrong, but good is also real, and it comes from God. In this scene, Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd. And in contrast to the wolf or the thief or the robber, Jesus has come that you might have life, and have life in all of its fullness. So why bother with God? Well, I believe God makes sense of the world we see around us. It offers persuasive answers to the questions that people are asking. And in the case of suffering, it says we are in a world in which good and evil are at play. Now, this doesn't answer all of our questions on suffering. Of course not. And there's something deeply mysterious about it. I will say more about this evening, if you would like to hear more at the service at 7 o'clock. But to say that our gut feeling that some things are wrong in this world makes most sense if God exists. There is a wolf, but there is also a good shepherd. Well, what kind of God are we talking about? In order to know whether God is worth bothering with, we need to know what kind of God you're even offering. Many people believe God exists. Not everyone believes he's actually good. In fact, one of the reasons why some people haven't bothered with God for a long time is because religion seems to do more harm than good. Perhaps you've heard too many stories of abuse in the church. Perhaps you've even been hurt by the church, and you presume that the God behind it, if he does exist, can't possibly be good. If that is you, I want to say sorry that that has been your experience of the Christian faith. And I want to ask you if you would consider taking one more look at the person of Jesus. Just because something has happened in the name of Christianity doesn't necessarily mean it represents the heart of what that is all about. And in fact, in this scene, Jesus addresses this very concern. He says, there have always been religious leaders that cause people to come to harm. But that need not be a reason to dismiss God altogether. Jesus contrasts two types of leaders, the hired hand and the shepherd. And you can tell them apart based on how they react when trouble comes. When the hired hand sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. And then the wolf is free to attack the flock and scatter it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. The hired hand gives out based on what he is getting in return. His commitment is transactional, quid pro quo. When it's working for me, I'll be here. When it's not, I won't. He gives according to what he gets back. The shepherd is ready to lay down his life. He is ready to die, fighting off the wolf to protect the sheep. He says, I am the good shepherd and I lay down my life for the sheep. It's as though there's this image of the shepherd standing between the wolf and the sheep and saying, if you want to get to them, you're going to have to go through me first. Anything you want to do to kill and steal and destroy, you're going to have to do to me. You see, what kind of God am I commending to you this morning? I am commending to you one that will never abandon you when trouble comes. He will be with you in it. One who will never leave you. When others may have left you, he will never forsake you, even though others may have forsaken you. He says, I am the good shepherd, and I stand between the wolf and you to protect you, so that you might have life in all of its fullness. Some people say, isn't Jesus a bit egotistical? Doesn't he have an exaggerated sense of his own importance? The shepherd is greater than the sheep? I don't know about that. And we seem to have no shortage of slightly self-centered leaders in our world today. But when a leader begins to say, I will take a bullet for you. I will lay down my life for you. Well, that's another kind of leadership altogether. Jesus is speaking about what he later went on to suffer and die for us on the cross. What is the value of a human life? We're just approaching Christmas. We're weighing up our budget. We're looking in the shops. Value in worldly terms is determined by what you are prepared to pay. Is this a good deal? Is this a good use of my money? Value is determined by what you're prepared to pay. What then is the value of a human life, and what kind of price might this God have been willing to pay for us? He was willing to pay the highest possible price that there is. He said, I will pay. I am God. I myself will come and die for you so that you can live, so that you can have life in all of its fullness. That is the opposite of egotistical. I don't know if you have seen the movie, the Oscar-winning movie, Hacksaw Ridge. This is the story of the Christian and pacifist Desmond Doss, who served in World War II, despite never holding a gun. And he actually was ridiculed by his comrades for this seemingly ridiculous position. They even beat him up, even before they went out to fight. After a particularly brutal onslaught, when they arrived in Japan, they had to fight in this place called Hacksaw Ridge, which is essentially a cliff face. They had to climb up it, and then there was a battle on the other side. And they got up to the top of this ridge, and they were not prepared for what they met. The Japanese were ready, and there was just an overwhelming firing and bombing, and a lot of this platoon were killed, and many, many more were maimed. And then they were just stranded on this ridge. Well, Desmond Doss spent the night rescuing maimed men from the battlefield. He had learned to tie knots in his training, so he made this hoist, and he was running into the battlefield, dodging bullets, grabbing men, dragging them to the edge of the ridge and lowering them down in a pulley system. And then the people at the bottom were finding these soldiers being delivered to them. Every time he had lowered one man down, this man was a Christian, and he prayed this prayer: Lord, help me save one more person. Every time. And then he would run back in, find another person, drag them to the edge, and lower them down. Roughly 75 lives were saved that night by this one man. Who does that? Who does that? You know, when we hear about that kind of sacrifice, it's rare. It stirs something in us. This is other. This is not how the world normally operates. This is only a glimpse into the kind of love that Jesus has for you, and the kind of sacrifice that he has made for you. You might ask, why was a cross even necessary? You say Jesus died on a cross. What does that mean? Well, I think this idea of psychological crutch that we talked about earlier helps us. You know, a crutch helps to mend something that is broken and needs fixing. The Christian perspective is that people are beautiful and broken. We are not the people we want to be, even despite our best efforts, and no amount of self-help and meditative techniques can get us to be the person that we want to be. And sin is not so much an action as a condition of saying, I'm doing this my way, I don't need your help. Thank you very much, God. Something is broken, and we can't fix it ourselves. We need help from outside. But the thing is, with a crutch only works if the crutch is not broken, so that it can bear the full weight of the person who is broken. Jesus is not broken like we are. And therefore, he is able to bear the full weight of our sin and our brokenness. He took the full weight of all of your wrongs, all of your regrets, all of your shame onto himself on the cross, so that if you lean into him today, you can stand tall and strong. He says he will mend our brokenness. He offers us forgiveness and friendship with God. We all have things that we are carrying. Some of you carry heavy burdens today. There is a way to be free from the burdens that you carry. It involves turning to Christ and placing that weight on him, and he will carry it for you. Will you consider putting your full weight into the person of Jesus Christ today? He says, I am the good shepherd, and I have come that you might have life and have it in all of its fullness. Some of you know all too well the work of the thief and the robber and the wolf. Your life has known times of feeling robbed and having things stolen and destroyed and killed. This does not need to be the end of the story. Some of you may feel like your best days are behind you. I think if you turn to God, if you let him into your life, your best days are ahead of you. There is an adventure with God who loves you and offers you life and forgiveness. Will you consider putting your full weight into the person of Jesus? I'm going to give you a moment to respond in a few minutes. Be thinking about what that means for you. But before we do, I want to look at one more reason why we should bother with God today. God is worth bothering with today because it is quite literally a matter of life and death. Some think Christianity is benign and irrelevant and some sort of tamed lion. At the heart of Christianity is the claim that our biggest fear, our biggest dread, the biggest taboo, that we come up with other words to describe it, death, has been defeated. Jesus has not only laid down his life, but has taken it up again. He says, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. And Jesus, for this reason, is not a helpless victim. He is not a victim of his circumstances. He chose to do this for you. And he did not stay dead. How do we know he rose from the dead? I once read in my alumni magazine from Bristol the following report in the obituary section. Due to an administrative error, the death of Mr. F. Jacobs, BA 1956, was mistakenly announced in the autumn 2012 edition of Nonesuch. He is in fact alive and well, and we apologize for any concern caused. Could the resurrection just be an error, a mistake? There is lots that we could say to this. There are reams of scholarship on this. Only to say that several people who set out to disprove the resurrection ended up becoming convinced that the only logical conclusion was that Jesus really did rise from the dead. Most Christians do not follow Christ because it meets a need in them, but because it is true. One man in human history has risen from death. His name is Jesus Christ, and he says, if you follow me, the same will be true of you. There is life and hope for this life, and then there is life in the life to come. You see, to be a Christian is to have the life of God in you. God is able to bring dead things to life for us today, not just as a dream in the future. The head of the organization that I work for is someone called Ravi Zacharias. And Ravi Zacharias grew up in India. And at the age of 17, he had reached such a state of disillusionment with his life that he attempted suicide. And it didn't succeed. And he was in hospital, in bed, with all of the shame and the weight and the dishonor that he had brought to his family. And a Christian visited him and gave him a New Testament, and he opened it at John's Gospel, and the words that he read at that point changed the course of his life forever. These are the words that he read, the words of Jesus. because I live, you also will live. Because I am not a dead God, I am alive and well today. You will live. I will breathe life into the dead places in your life so that you can know hope and forgiveness and transformation. You can tackle and overcome the things that you've been wrestling and battling with. There is more. There is more with God. Maybe it's to breathe life into your self-esteem. Maybe it's life into a dying relationship. Maybe it's life into a dead-end job. But be sure of this. To know friendship with God is to feel more alive, happier in your skin. It is to know yourself better, not to become some weird religious person. It is to become more yourself. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that you might have life, and life in all of its fullness. I am the good shepherd, and I have laid down my life for you. What will you do with Jesus Christ today? We're in so many different places in the room. So many of you know the Lord, and it is good to be reminded of who God is and his plans for you. Some of you have questions. You're on a journey. You've been asking questions, and you want to keep asking those questions, and I encourage you to do that. If something is true, then no matter how hard the question is, it's not going to crumble underneath you. But there may be one or two people here today for whom actually you've been thinking about this, or maybe you've been far from God for a number of years, but actually you feel God chasing you down like we sang in that song. I believe there are people here today that God is chasing you down and says, it's time to stop fighting. It's time to come home. And if that is you, I would love to pray. And I would love to pray and invite you to pray with me. I'm going to pray a very simple prayer. Sorry, thank you, please. Sorry for living without you. Thank you for dying for me. Please forgive me. Please come into my life. Please fill me with your love and your life. And if that is you, I encourage you to pray. It's never too late, and it's never too early. What will you do with Jesus? Why don't we pray? Lord God, I thank you that you are the good shepherd, and you have laid down your life for us. I thank you that you have come that we might have life in all of its fullness. Sorry for living without you. Sorry for doing things my way. Thank you for dying for me. Please forgive me for all my wrongs. Please come into my life. Please fill me with your life and your light and your Holy Spirit. Amen. If you just prayed with me, I would love to speak to you at the end. I have a book that I would love to give you, and I pray that you would know the reality of the choice that you have just made, that you would know God's love for you in a very real way today. I would like to draw your attention to the response, these cards, these feedback cards that are on your chair. We have these here because we want to have a way of following up with you individually, because we believe everyone matters. And if you just prayed with me now, would you tick count me in so that we know that that's the step that you took, and leave a name and a number or an email? If you weren't ready to pray with me, but you would like to keep the conversation going, would you tell me more and leave your details, and we can pick up that conversation with you as well. And if you have any other feedback, please do put it on the form. Thank you so much for listening.